Hello there, paper crafters. It's Kelly from Snips by Kelly, and today I'm going to be showing you 15 simple ways to turn flat paper leaves into realistic rustic autumn leaves for your scrapbook layouts, cards, and fall projects. Now we're going to be using something a little bit different. We're using the Harvest Home Garland Kit. Now inside this kit, it has all of the parts and pieces needed to make like a 5.5-foot long garland wreath. But I discovered about 28 pages of leaves inside this kit. So we're going to put aside the garland and the acorns, and we're actually going to use the punch out leaves in this kit to be able to prep them and use techniques on them to create realistic looking leaves that I can use on many of my fall projects. Now these leaves are pre-scored, so they have some texture to them. Some of the papers that the leaves are made out of are actually textured papers. We have some smooth papers, some textured papers. We have all different colors. We have a little bit of copper foil. I'm actually going to save some of the negative punch out pieces because there's so much extra paper on that. I feel like I can make banners and other things out of the leftovers. Now I've actually designed a little cheat sheet here with 15 squares or more than 15 squares where we can do some simple rehearsing for some very simple techniques that are going to make us look fabulous. Now they're going to start in categories from simple things such as just shaping, to inking, to detail, to distressing, to finishing touches. Now I've used a very neutral color here, and we're going to show very basically the base parts of each of the techniques. And we're going to start with shaping, and then we're going to get into great detail and pull everything together for some really beautiful leaves at the end. So for shaping techniques, we're going to start with pinch and pull. And it's just a simple shaping technique, but these particular leaves are already scored. So what do you do if you don't have scored leaves? You can actually use your scoring tool or your scoring stylus, and you can make leaf lines or realistic leaf lines inside yourself. And all you're going to do for pinch and pull is you're going to pinch the leaves together and pull them downwards. It's a most basic level shaping, and then you can put foam tape or something behind that to keep that shape if you want to. It's super basic, but it makes it look a lot more realistic than a flat leaf. Next, you can fold and then bend. Now, I like to just use whatever I happen to have handy. So you can pinch the middle together again, but then you can fold on the natural score lines and fold down the leaf ends. You could fold them down, you can fold them up. If you think about a natural leaf, it can go in any direction. So I sometimes will use a marker, a pencil, a scoring tool, anything that I have. There are actual tools that are curling tools that you can pinch the end with and roll them really tight and then unroll them. But I find a pencil, a finger, a marker, anything works really well to roll that and make it look nice and round. The next one is heat curling. Now these leaves are just a tiny bit thicker than regular cardstock, so it's not going to be as dramatic, but when you're using regular cardstock and you apply the heat to the back of the cardstock, you can actually almost physically see the edges turning under. They'll curl under naturally, and then the heat warms up the paper and the paper becomes a lot more pliable, and it allows you to bend and shape that in different directions. And so you can just simply use the heat tool to make it more pliable, bend parts and pieces on the natural folds, and there you have it. The next one is burnishing a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a medium or a light ink to the middle, and we're going to kind of burnish the edges with a darker ink and curl those under or burnish those under with a scoring tool. So you're actually just making it look darker on the edges. Now I happen to just use crushed curry, but you can use any fall color here, and it's going to look very basic, but we're going to use this technique later with some blending, and it's going to be gorgeous with a combination of some of these techniques put together. So you can see how you're making it look very much darker on the edges. and lighter in the center. And you're looking a little bit more to make the edges look like a rustic leaf where it's a little bit more tattered, torn, and burnt on a regular real leaf. Next, we're going to go to a group of inking techniques, and we're going to start with two-tone blending. This is probably something that I use the most common, where again, you're coming in on the middle with a lighter color. So we have crumb cake that I'm coming into the middle, and then we're going to come on the outer edges with a darker. So I'm going to use a darker pecan pie. So I used a blending brush in the center, so it was a little softer, and now I'm going to use a sponge dauber on the edges so it's a little bit more rich. Then I'm going to come in sideways a little bit on some of those natural score lines to give those veins a little bit more of a look, and then I can bend it again with my bone folder and make it look a little bit more realistic. And that's so pretty with different colors of fall. Different fall colors. Now the next one that we're going to use is probably one that I use absolutely the most, and it's rustic edge inking. So I'm going to come in again with pecan pie in just a few spots, and I'm going to make sure on all the leaves that I do today that you'll see here in just a little bit, I'm going to come in a little bit darker and in random spots so that no two leaves are alike. What I love about these simple techniques is you don't really have to have any skill because no two leaves look alike, and everything that you do can look like you meant to do that. So I did a few darker spots, then I did the edges, and then I'm going to actually do the bending and the folding just like I did in all of the others. And you're just basically trying to get a rustic edge. The next one is kind of like dry brushing. You're going to want your brush to be really, really dry. You're going to barely put any ink on it. Now I'm using a pretty bold ink. This is the Cajun Craze ink, but I'm going to brush almost all of it off. I want hardly any left, and I'm going to do longer brush strokes on the natural veins so that they start out a little thicker and they start to get super thin out toward the edges. And then it's just going to leave a little bit of a darker tone on the veins. And that is dry brushing because your brush really isn't wet. I'm not adding any water like you would on a water brush. And then you can add other techniques to that as well. So if you wanted to come back in and add some rustic edge inking, you could do that like I'm doing here with the Cajun Craze and add that to the dry brushing. And then we're going to move into some more detail where I don't always use some of these techniques near as much because quite honestly, I'm a little lazy and I love a lot of rubbing, but we're going to move into a little bit of vein painting. So you can find a small water brush or a detail water brush, or it could just be a regular paint brush. And we're going to do a little bit of ink painting on some veins here. Now I'm just going to add the curling to that last one. And now we're going to add a little bit of, I think it's crumb cake here, and a little bit of water to a small fine tip brush. And all we're going to do is paint along the veins. And again, you start thicker and you're a little bit wispy at the end, like a regular leaf where it sort of trails off as you get to the veins in the branches. And then we can come back in with an even lighter color, and we can come underneath those leaf veins and add more details that way. So we can add a little bit more color on the bottom. So you're just literally painting with your ink. I'm not the best at techniques like this. I'm probably not the most patient, but it's an interesting thing to be able to add, and you can add some other techniques to that. Once you curl those, maybe do some distressing on the edges, it makes a really pretty leaf. So the next one we're going to look at is a little bit of dot shadowing. Again, another one that I'm not the best at, but you add all kinds of little dots. If you've ever watched a professional do dot shadowing, it's one of the most fascinating fascinating things that you could ever see. So you're going to put dots sparingly around, and then you're going to run the dots a little bit closer together on the natural shadows. So you would probably run dots closer on the veins, running up and running across the leaf, and make a darker shadows with dots. Now I'm using a colored pencil. You could do this with water markers or water brushes. I don't have a real fine hand, and so the look is okay to me, but it's not a skill that I've perfected enough to really love. But it's a different technique that you could use from time to time, even if you only wanted to use it on a section of a leaf and just have a little bit of an interesting look at it. But you can see how the shadow starts to take shape as you run the dots together. And I'm just repeating the dots over and over and over until you get a little bit more of a thicker shadow. Again, if you have a chance to do a search for dot shadowing, or dot shadow painting or dot shadow coloring, you really should watch it. It's really, like, I am blown away by the talent of some people and how they can use this technique and make it look so gorgeous. Now, obviously, this next technique is going to be one that you're probably familiar with, and it's one that I love to use, and it's a splatter technique. So you can press a little bit of ink into your mat and add a little bit of water, take a water brush and make splatters with it. You can also make great splatters with your Stampin' Blend markers by using the brush tip and flicking it against the cap. And it's such a fast and easy way to make a really fun effect on the leaves. I love using this splatter effect with the Stampin' Blend markers on all kinds of projects. It's so fast and it's so easy. You could do this with a little bit of Wink of Stella as well. You can do it with more than one tone of marker. If you add the Wink of Stella to a little bit of marker, you'll get a little bit of shimmer in the marker, and it makes a really pretty effect. Next, we're going to look at some distressing, and here's about the easiest you can get. Spritz your leaf with a little bit of water, crumple it up, and spread it back out. This is also called a leathering technique, where you can actually leather your paper by getting it moist, crumpling it up, and pressing it back out, and it gives it a more realistic leaf feel. Next, we have a little bit of an imperfect tear. So you could definitely do your own tearing. You could also use a distress tool that gives a little bit of a tearing effect. You could use the inside of a scissor and do a little bit of distressing that way. But the whole point is to make the leaf look less than perfect. If you pull a whole pile of leaves, you're going to have some that are a little bit torn, a little bit tattered. They're not all going to look perfect. And so what you're going to do is just distress a little heavier on the imperfect tear so that it's a little bit darker in that area, and then you can add any other technique to that you want, and it makes it look a little less than perfect and more like a realistic leaf. Water mottling has been around, or water splatter, where you have technique that you've applied to leaves, whether it's a light inking or distressing, and you're just going to spritz the leaf with a little bit of water. Now, these are a little bit thicker leaves, so I do notice that I have to leave the water set just a tiny bit longer on it, and then maybe blot it a little bit with a paper towel or a tissue. But I love that splattery effect. So you can do that with a water brush, you can do that with a squirt bottle, you can do that by tapping just a pencil into some water and tapping it against another pencil and tapping some water splots down. It's just so easy to do. The next one, we're going to talk a little bit about dusting. So you can use chalk and do dusting with chalk. I'm actually going to do dusting with a sponge. And dusting is where you come up along one side or the other side and you add a little layer of sponging or dusting to create a little bit of a shadow. And it's a really fun effect as well. It gives it some wonderful texture. Now, what you can do is you can do combinations of all of these techniques, but we're also going to do some layering of some different leaves. So I'm going to combine a couple colors here. I'm going to come in with a little bit of rustic edge distressing. So I've got a little pecan pie here. And then I'm going to crumple that all up and use a little bit of a crumple. And then we're going to add a couple other different techniques to this. We can add a little inking, a little blending. We can add a little splatter. So I'm going to come over the top with a little crushed curry and go right over the top of those, the texture that we got from crumpling. I'm going to come in with a little bit of pumpkin pie in a couple different spots there. And then I'll probably do a little bit of distressing around the edges also. I think I have a little crumb cake that I added. I'll do a little bit on the natural veins here with pecan pie. Do a little bit of folding, bending, and pinching. And get a really, really pretty multicolored leaf here. And then I always like to finish the edges with a little burnished look and add the extra inking on the edges there, make it look finished. Love that. It's so pretty. We can curl that with a scoring tool and we have a multicolored leaf. Now, what happens, let's go ahead and add a little bit of water splotches, excuse me there. And then what happens when you actually have colored leaves? You can take colored leaves and add additional color to those just as easily as you can a light colored leaf. But I love this look of all of the different natural tones. Now I got a little bit too much water, so I'm just coming back in on some of those natural lines a little bit and giving those a nice natural line. So I'm going to show you a couple more with the color, and then I'm going to show you a whole bunch of techniques where we're pulling it all together. So let's start with this green leaf, and let's take a little bit of that pecan pie again. And let's go ahead and do a little bit of rustic edge inking there. And we'll really get that into a couple spots really dark. And then we'll do all of the edges and make them look a little bit burnt, little dirty, all the way around again. Pecan pie is my go-to. Let's go ahead and do a lot of bending, pinching, and pulling. Let's go ahead and ink a lot of those veins. Let's do the crumpling. Pull it back out, make it look nice and leathered. And then let's do a little bit of water splattering on that. Blot it off a little bit. Looks so realistic. I love that. Then we can do some layering. Let's go ahead and do that with one of the other colored leaves. I'm going to come back in around the edges here with pecan pie. Do some creasing and bending and get a little bit of ink on those natural veins. Crumple the whole thing up. Isn't that satisfying just to crumple that leaf up? And then I'm going to come back in with a really, really bold color here. So we're going to have Cajun Craze, and we're going to go relatively dark here. And we're going to come down on one edge and then come back in and make sure we have those darker lines on there. Do a little bit of water tapping again. Repeating a lot of those same techniques over and over using different fall colors. And then we'll do some leaf layering. How pretty is that? So you can see that I've layered several of those leaves that combined techniques, and it's so pretty. So we started out with basic shaping We went to basic inking. We started adding detail enhancing things like dot shadowing, vein painting, and splatter effects, splatter being my most favorite. Then we did distressing with crinkling, imperfect tearing, and water modeling. And then we did a little bit of dusting and sponging. So let's take a look at what I did with these green ones. For these green ones, I did pecan pie and I did rustic edge inking. I did a little bit of blending in with the veins. I did splattering with a marker and then did inking around the edges and added the water. Now I got extra water in certain spots, which actually made the leaves look rusted out. For this one, I used Cajun Craze ink. I did the distressing around the edges again, and then I used the pecan pie ink on top of that and the water modeling. Now here's another red leaf that I did a little bit differently. Instead of Cajun Craze, I went to Calypso Coral and then I did the dusting. So I added pecan pie with a sponge in different spots. I still did the distress edging around that. On this green one, I went with dark mossy meadow and then I did light sea foam. I actually did a little bit of spritzing and splatter with some white gloss spray and did pecan pie around the edges. These turned out so beautiful. They look so realistic and so real. On these leaves, I came in with Calypso Coral on the gray texture. I did crumb cake around the edges. I did the splattering with Calypso Coral. And then, of course, I did crinkling and curling. Now, for the copper color leaves, all I did is shaping. I used the scoring tool or the bone folder and I just did shaping on all of those. I didn't do anything with edges or anything like that. These ones I ended up loving so much. So what I did is I took white ink and did sponge dusting all the way around the leaf. And then I did pecan pie sponging as well. And then I also did rubbing of the pecan pie in the middle and around the edges. I love those. They look so, so real and tattered. And you know how when leaves are in, they get a little bit of water on them and then they're left for a while, they have that little speckled look. These blue ones I really end up loving as well. I did rustic edge inking in a variety of spots with pecan pie. I rubbed some gold glitter gel onto that pecan pie area. I made sure to go through and do all the veins, and then I did marker splattering. On these lighter colored leaves, I did a combination. So again, I did some pecan pie spots. I went over it with crushed curry. I came back in with pumpkin pie, did all the edges with pecan pie, and did marker splattering on top of that. Love those. This one was so, so pretty. It was one of my favorites. And then of course I did the crimping and the pinching. That's a given on all of them to make them look a lot less flat and a lot more realistic. I really loved that combination. Now there were quite a few leaves in the set that were double leaves. So what I did is I did each single leaf exactly as I had done the other single leaves of that color. And then even though they were a combo leaf, I did each leaf the way that it was supposed to be. So those are all of the basic shaping, inking, detailed distressing, and finishing techniques. 15 techniques in all, and I love the combination. I love how beautiful all of these leaves turned out. They look so much more realistic, and look how many leaves that you get in the Harvest Garland set. It's just crazy. I hope you enjoyed all 15 of these simple techniques and that you will give them a try. I have my favorites that I have a tendency to use over and over, but the combination is amazing. I love the combination and what kinds of leaves that you can come up with these simple techniques. I hope you'll hit like, subscribe, the notifications bell, and you'll come back soon for more tips and tricks right here on Snips by Kelly. Thanks for watching.